Do you ever get that feeling that you really know the people around you? Like, you've got a built-in radar for who's toxic, when a vibe is just off, or when someone's behavior is way out of line. But what if I told you the most dangerous people aren't the ones who are obviously villains? What if they're the charming ones, the kind ones, maybe even someone in your own family? And while you're busy dodging the obvious threats, you're leaving the back door of your mind wide open for something way more sinister to sneak in. The unconscious mind of another person invading your own. Carl Jung, the legendary psychoanalyst, spent his entire life digging into these hidden parts of us. In his groundbreaking work, he revealed a chilling truth. Most of what drives us, what truly governs our actions, isn't under our conscious control. And that's not just true for you, it's true for everyone. And that, right there, is where the real danger begins. Because when someone is completely blind to their own inner darkness, that shadow needs to find a place to live. And all too often, that place is you. Maybe you've never really thought about it like this, but let's be real for a second. How many times have you walked away from a conversation feeling completely and utterly drained for no reason? How many times have you been blamed for something you didn't do, or been made the hero in a drama you never auditioned for? Jung had a name for this: projection. It's this unconscious defense mechanism where someone takes all the stuff they can't stand about themselves and just throws it onto you. In that moment, you stop being a person. You become a symbol, a mirror, an imaginary enemy, or an idealized savior. And none of it, not a single piece of it, is actually you. But here's the terrifying part. Most of the time, you don't even realize you're caught in this twisted game. You think you're just being helpful or empathetic or the bigger person. But what's really happening is you're sinking into a psychological swamp that isn't yours. You're trying to solve conflicts that have nothing to do with you, being manipulated by forces that you didn't create, but are now running your life. And this isn't just about people with bad intentions. Jung made it crystal clear. The greatest dangers don't come from people who are consciously twisted, but from the ones who are unconsciously a mess. These are the people who are living completely disconnected from their own psyche, ruled by masks, old traumas, complexes, and desires they've buried alive. They aren't evil. They're just dangerous. And this danger is quiet. It doesn't kick down the front door. It seeps in, bit by bit, day by day, through little comments, backhanded compliments, and heavy, loaded silences. It works on you until you start to doubt your own sanity. And the moment you lose touch with your own psychic reality, you've become a part of their shadow. Maybe this is hitting a little too close to home. Maybe you're going through this right now, in a relationship, a friendship, at work, or even with your own family. And maybe you're blaming yourself, trying to figure out what's so wrong with you. The answer is nothing. But there is something deeply wrong with how you're being used as a dumping ground for someone else's unconscious baggage. In this video, we are going to drag into the light, one by one, the 6 types of people that Jung would label as emotionally dangerous. These are types who act not out of deliberate malice, but from inner forces they don't even understand. And that's precisely why they're so destructive. We'll be using Jung's own words, his concepts, and his warnings, straight from his essential works, to show you how to spot these profiles. But more than that, we're going to open your eyes to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, one or more of these profiles is living inside of you too. Ready? Take a deep breath. Because I promise you after this, you will never look at people, or yourself, the same way again. Imagine being with someone who blames you for every single thing they feel. Someone who turns your very presence into a trigger, who makes you feel responsible for emotions you had absolutely nothing to do with. At first, they might seem fragile, deep, and incredibly sensitive. But over time, you start to realize you've been dragged onto a battlefield that isn't yours, and you're already losing. This is the unconscious manipulator, They are completely unaware of their own wounds, but they project them onto you as a twisted form of psychic survival. Jung once said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate." And a lot of the time, that fate has a name, a face, and sits right across the dinner table from you. The unconscious manipulator is totally dominated by repressed stuff, unhealed traumas, fragments of emotional pain they've never processed. Instead of looking in the mirror, they point the finger at you, turning you into a blank canvas for all their internal wars. This person exists in a state of chronic projection. According to Jung, projection is something we all do, but when we're blind to it, it becomes incredibly destructive. He wrote that it creates a kind of psychic blindness, a prison where you stop seeing the other person for who they are, and start using them as a symbol for what's hidden inside you. That's the manipulator's exact move. They don't see you. They see a lost part of themselves, and they react to you as if you're the problem. These people almost always play the victim. Everything bad that happens is someone else's fault, never theirs. If they feel angry, it's because you provoked them. If they're sad, it's because you disappointed them. If they feel small, it's because you think you're so much better. This distortion is so subtle and so powerful that you actually start to question your own reality. Was I really being insensitive? Did I say the wrong thing? Wait, am I the toxic one? And just like that, the manipulation works. Without a single shout, without a single direct demand. It's all emotional, all unconscious, and it is brutally effective. What's worse is that these people are often incredibly charming. They have charisma, an intense emotional aura, a kind of broken sensitivity. This creates a perfect trap because you think you can help them. You think you can be the one to finally understand and heal them. But what you're actually doing is sacrificing your own mental health, trying to save someone who refuses to even look at their own reflection. The harder you try, the deeper you sink. Jung warns us that these patterns of projection are especially dangerous because they force us into a symbolic role. You become the savior, the villain, the traitor, the parent, anything but who you actually are. And living in a symbolic relationship is living in a complete illusion. You're not a person anymore. You're just a distorted reflection of their unconscious mess. The only way out is to wake up. Recognize the pattern that die. Cut the invisible strings that tie you to their emotional drama. And most importantly, constantly ask yourself, is this feeling actually mine, or was it put on me? Because the unconscious manipulator doesn't break into your life. They slip in through the cracks of your own empathy. But once you spot this pattern, you have to understand how it can get even more disguised, hiding behind the mask of the persona. This is the person who doesn't just project, they perform. They live their entire life pretending to be something they're not. Next, we'll expose the bearer of the persona and how they represent one of the biggest psychological risks Jung ever pointed out. Because while the manipulator throws their crap onto you, the bearer of the persona can drag you so deep into their act that you forget who you are too. Not all psychological danger is loud and aggressive. Sometimes, the real danger comes from what looks a little too perfect. The smile that's always on. The posture that's always impeccable. The image that never has a single flaw. We're living in an age of appearances, where seeming is way more important than being. And for Jung, this was a massive problem. Because when someone identifies too much with their persona, that social mask we all wear to fit in, they risk completely disconnecting from their true self. And the person living for the mask doesn't just lose themselves. They start to warp everyone around them. In his work, Jung says the persona is what someone is not, but what he and others think he is. Basically, it's an artificial self, built out of what society, family, and our jobs expect from us. And having a persona isn't a bad thing on its own. We all need one. It's how we function as a doctor, a teacher, a friend. The trouble starts when someone believes that the mask is all there is. When the mask gets glued to the face, and everything that's real, spontaneous, and vulnerable gets locked away in the basement of the psyche. The bearer of the persona is the absolute master of functional superficiality. They say all the right things, behave in the most appropriate way, and avoid conflict like the plague. But behind that perfect curtain of control, there's a soul that's completely falling apart. Because the more they prop up that image, the more they suffocate their true self. And that level of repression always comes back to bite. For anyone living with this person, the effect is deeply unsettling. You can just feel that something is off, but you can't put your finger on what it is. There's no real spontaneity, no truth, no depth. Every interaction feels like it's been rehearsed. And what's worse, the bearer of the persona projects this demand for perfection onto you. They expect you to perform, to play your part, to keep their theater going. If you show a real emotion, a doubt, a moment of pain, anything that's not in the script, they shut down, get weird, or just retreat. Because anything that reminds them of what they've repressed is unbearable. Jung warned that this over-identification with the persona is one of the biggest threats to individuation, that journey of self-discovery and integrating your unconscious. For him, the real danger starts when a person is basically hypnotized by the role they play, truly believing they are nothing more than what other people see. They become a hostage to their own facade, and everything genuine inside of them just dies, suffocated behind the polish. Living with someone like this can make you start to doubt your own authenticity. You start policing yourself, measuring your words, hiding the parts of you that don't fit into their perfect little narrative. Slowly, without even realizing it, you start wearing a mask too. Being around the bearer of the persona isn't just artificial, it's contagious. But there's something even darker lurking beneath this. Because when someone represses what they feel, think, and want for too long, it doesn't just vanish. It builds up. It ferments in the unconscious until it becomes their shadow. And that's when we enter an even more dangerous territory, where denied emotions come roaring back with explosive force. You know the type. The person who seems so controlled, so polished, so impossibly restrained. Always correct, always moderate, always polite. But behind that perfect veneer of balance, there's a pressure cooker about to blow. Because everything they've decided is wrong, ugly, or unacceptable about themselves gets shoved down into the basement of their soul. It's not dealt with, it's not transformed, it's just repressed. This is the owner of the repressed shadow. The person who tries so hard to be pure light that their darkness eventually takes over completely. Carl Jung spent a huge part of his career trying to understand the shadow. He said the shadow is everything a person refuses to acknowledge about themselves, and yet it always finds a way to show up. We're not talking about something outside of us. The shadow isn't some evil in the world. It's not other people. The shadow is inside. It's the rage you won't admit you feel. It's the jealousy you try to explain away. It's the desires you suppress. It's the ambition you disguise as humility. Everything you reject in yourself doesn't just disappear. It becomes your shadow. And as Jung famously said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The owner of the repressed shadow doesn't seem dangerous at first. In fact, they're often admired. They're disciplined, kind, always willing to help. But there's something off. They can't stand weakness in other people. They have a weirdly hostile reaction to spontaneity. Intense emotions make them deeply uncomfortable. They always seem to be simmering with some hidden tension, but they never explode. Until one day they do. And when it happens, it is absolutely devastating. This person lives in a state of constant self-surveillance. They don't let themselves feel, so they condemn others who do. They don't let themselves make mistakes, so they attack others who do. They become judgmental, demanding, and controlling. But all of this is just a desperate attempt to keep their own unconscious on a leash. Jung was clear on this. The stronger the persona, the more repressed the shadow. And the more repressed the shadow, the more brutal it will be when it finally breaks free. You can spot this pattern in people who have completely disproportionate reactions, who fly off the handle over tiny things, who hold on to grudges for years, who sabotage their relationships with passive-aggressive digs. They're those difficult people that nobody can figure out. Why are they so bitter, so resentful, so critical? The answer is buried in the shadow they've never integrated, never acknowledged, and never accepted. And here's the crucial part. The shadow isn't just made of bad things. Jung made it clear that it also holds your untapped potential, your repressed creativity, your hidden strengths. But when the shadow is completely ignored, all of that potential turns into poison. And that poison seeps out, contaminating relationships, the environment, and especially the people who are closest to them. Living with the owner of the repressed shadow is like walking through an emotional minefield. You never know what's going to set them off until you've already been hit. But this kind of repression doesn't just come from nowhere. It's often fueled by an illusion of superiority, by a rigid moral ideal that uses guilt as a weapon of control. And that's where we meet our next type, the moral controller. The person who not only represses their own desires, but makes you feel guilty for daring to live yours. In the next part, we'll unmask this type that Jung saw as one of the greatest barriers to psychic freedom, the guardian of virtue who is secretly hiding their own demons. Not every executioner carries a sword. Some of them come armed with crosses, rulebooks, dogmas, and holier-than-thou phrases. They're the ones who claim to be driven by ethics, by righteousness, by a higher morality. But what they're really doing is trapping themselves, and everyone around them, in a cage built from guilt and shame. Jung knew this archetype inside and out. For him, when morality is just a mask, it becomes one of the most insidious forms of psychological repression. This is the moral controller. They don't integrate their own shadow. They project it onto your behavior and condemn you for the very things they can't accept in themselves. You've definitely met someone like this. They're always pointing fingers, but never, ever look in the mirror. They position themselves as the ultimate authority on how to behave, not because they're truly virtuous, but because they have a desperate, deep-seated need to maintain an image of moral superiority. According to Jung, the greater the repression, the more intense the need to project the shadow. And that is the moral controller's entire game. They turn other people into sinners, deviants, and heathens to avoid facing their own desires, their own impulses, and their own contradictions. The problem is, unlike a typical emotional manipulator, the moral controller genuinely believes they are doing good. They think they're correcting you, saving you, or educating you. This makes their influence even more toxic, because it's cloaked in authority, in good intentions, and in a kind of false spirituality. The criticism always comes with a chaser like, "I'm only telling you this for your own good," or someone has to tell you the truth. But that truth isn't neutral. It is dripping with projection. In his book, Ion, Jung talks extensively about the archetypes of Christ and the Antichrist, representing wholeness and dissociation. The moral controller believes they are embodying the light while being completely oblivious to their own darkness. They project evil onto others to maintain the illusion of their own purity, and this makes them blind, dangerous, and utterly incapable of seeing the complex, messy truth of the human soul. If you live with someone like this, you can start to feel perpetually guilty, like you're always doing something wrong. You feel watched, judged, and diminished just for existing. And the most twisted part is that you often start to internalize their judgment. You begin to repress parts of yourself, natural, human, spontaneous parts, and try to contort yourself to fit an ideal that isn't even yours. Their morality becomes your prison. This dynamic is incredibly common in rigid families, religious groups, and any environment where obedience is mistaken for virtue. Jung saw this pattern as a direct threat to the process of individuation. Because where there is extreme moralism, there is a total absence of self-knowledge. The extreme moralist doesn't want truth, they want control. And when they can't control the world outside, they start controlling the inner worlds of everyone around them. But the moral controller isn't the only one driven by unconscious forces. There's another type that's even more volatile, unstable, and wildly unpredictable. The complex. While the moralist represses and projects, the complexed person is completely hijacked by their unconscious content, reacting like an emotional puppet on a string. In the next part, we're diving into this explosive territory where consciousness is no longer in the driver's seat, and old traumas take the wheel. Get ready to meet the person who can love you today and destroy you tomorrow without ever knowing why. Imagine trying to live with someone who, 1 minute, is the sweetest, most affectionate person you know, and the next explodes with rage, shuts down into a stony silence, or accuses you of something that never even crossed your mind. A simple compliment somehow becomes a demand. A joke turns into an attack. A loving gesture is interpreted as a threat. It feels like no matter what you do, you're constantly walking on emotional quicksand. This is the daily reality of anyone living alongside a person who is dominated by their unconscious complexes. For Jung, complexes are these autonomous little clusters of emotion and memory that live in our unconscious and can hijack our consciousness at any given moment. Think of them like fragmented personalities living inside us, created by past traumas, psychic wounds, and experiences we never fully resolve. Jung explained how these complexes can directly control a person's behavior, making them react not to what's happening in the present, but to the ghosts of their past. A simple comment can unconsciously link to an old feeling of abandonment or humiliation, and whoever is nearby ends up paying the price for it. The person ruled by complexes has no idea they're being driven by these internal forces. When they react with blinding fury, crushing sadness, or over-the-top resentment, they genuinely believe their reaction is rational. But it's not. They are reliving old, undigested emotions. And the problem is, it's not consistent. It happens in bursts. You get these emotional explosions followed by periods of complete lucidity, affection, or deep regret. This makes the relationship with them incredibly confusing and dangerously addictive. You start to tell yourself, well, they're not always like this. Sometimes they're so wonderful. And that's the hook. That's what keeps you trapped. Because there are moments of real connection, of true affection. But those moments are always followed by these unpredictable ruptures, leaving you in the middle of an emotional hurricane you can't comprehend. And in your desperate attempt to get back to the good times, you start to shrink yourself. You avoid certain topics, measure every word, and walk on eggshells, all to try and keep the monster from waking up. But here's the brutal truth. You're not the one waking the monster. It's always there, just beneath the surface, hungry and waiting for any trigger to emerge. And when it does, it consumes everything in its path. For Jung, unrecognized complexes eventually colonize the psyche. They speak for you. They feel for you. They act for you. This person might be dominated by a complex of inferiority, of martyrdom, of abandonment, of persecution, each one with its own story, its own emotions, its own demands. And the more you try to keep the peace, the more you feed the delusion that you can somehow control the uncontrollable. Being close to someone like this means living in a state of constant high alert. There's no emotional stability. The present is always being poisoned by the ghosts of the past. And sooner or later, you start to absorb those ghosts yourself. You begin to doubt your own sanity, your memory, your feelings. And without even noticing, your own psyche is being colonized by their unconscious. But the most dangerous part is still to come. Because while the complex person swings between emotional extremes, there is one last type who doesn't scream, doesn't explode, and doesn't accuse. They just consume your energy until there is absolutely nothing left. Some people don't want your presence. They want your energy, and they will do absolutely anything to drain it from you. Not with violence or overt aggression, but with subtle, constant demands, a chronic state of victimhood, and an emotional dependency that they disguise as affection. This is the psychic vampire. It's the most silent and insidious form of emotional drainage that Jung ever warned about, even if he didn't use that exact name. In Jungian terms, this is the symbol of the unresolved symbiotic relationship, the pathological bond that suffocates all psychic growth and dissolves the very edges of your own self. Jung shows us that one of the greatest threats to individuation, the path to becoming a whole, complete person, is these symbiotic relationships, where two people stop seeing themselves as separate individuals and instead act as psychic extensions of each other. The psychic vampire lives in this exact type of connection. They need your constant attention, your daily reassurance, your 24/7 availability. But behind all that neediness, there is a gaping void that isn't yours to fill, and that you will never, ever be able to fill. It starts with you just wanting to offer some support. Then you're giving up your time. Then you're tolerating emotional manipulation in the name of understanding, until one day you wake up and realize that all of your energy has been siphoned away, and you don't even know where they end and you begin. The exhaustion is profound. It's not just physical, it's existential. It feels like your very soul is being devoured, drop by drop, day after day. Jung spoke of people who, unable to support themselves psychically, latch onto others like emotional parasites. And as harsh as that sounds, it's the truth. The psychic vampire doesn't want to grow. They want to be carried. But the danger is not just in the exhaustion. It is in the dissolution of the self. You start to feel guilty for wanting your own space, selfish for wanting silence, cold for wanting some distance. Because the psychic vampire is a master at flipping the script. The victim becomes the accuser. The needy one becomes the manipulator. And before you even know what's happening, you're living your entire life just to avoid crisis, to keep a false peace, to sustain a bond that is killing you from the inside out. Jung offers us a way out of this jungle, to make the unconscious conscious. And this doesn't just apply to other people, it applies to us. Because let's be honest, maybe at some point in your life, you've been the psychic vampire, or the person ruled by complexes, or the one hiding behind a persona. None of us is immune. We all have a shadow. We all have pain. The difference is in who has the courage to look inside and who chooses to dump that weight onto someone else. This video was meant to be a mirror, a deep dive into the hidden dynamics that trap us, hurt us, and keep us asleep. If you've made it this far, it means you're ready. You're ready to see, to name what's happening, and to break free. And that, the act of seeing, is the first and most powerful form of freedom there is. It's not about blaming anyone. It's about stepping out of the role of the hostage and taking back ownership of your own mind. Now, I want you to be part of this. Leave a comment below. Which of these profiles have you come up against in your life? And, if you're being truly honest, which ones do you recognize in yourself? Your comment could be the spark of awareness for you, and for everyone else who reads it. And before you go, the next video in this journey is essential. It will take you even deeper. So keep watching. You need to see this. Because the more light we shine on the unconscious, the less power it has to control us. See you there.